For years, Will Smith has been known for his charisma, charm, and a carefully curated public image. But behind that polished Hollywood exterior, he finally admits there was a night that shook him to the core. A night he's kept buried in silence. Until now. Sitting for an unfiltered conversation, Will opens up like never before, his voice lower, his demeanor more tense than fans are used to seeing. What started as a casual reflection quickly turned into something far more haunting. He describes being invited to what he assumed was just another exclusive Hollywood party, a routine night of networking, laughter, and celebrity ego. But what he experienced that evening would rattle his perception of fame, power, and the dark underbelly of the entertainment world. It wasn't just a party, he says, staring off. It was something else, something I never want to experience again. His tone carries the weight of someone who's seen too much and stayed quiet for too long. It all started with a text. Simple, casual, almost routine. Will explains that the invitation came from someone he trusted, someone deeply embedded in the industry. "You don't say no to this kind of invite," he recalls. The location wasn't listed publicly. Instead, he was given vague directions and told to expect a driver. At first, it felt like another high-profile gathering, the kind where billionaires rub shoulders with blockbuster stars and secrets stay buried under NDAs. But something about the tone of the message stuck with him. It felt coded, almost rehearsed. When the driver arrived, Will was instructed not to speak, just ride. No phones, no photos, just silence. That's when the unease began to creep in. It wasn't about celebration, he says. It felt like initiation. He didn't know it yet, but that ride was the beginning of a journey into something far darker than he had ever anticipated. An underworld hiding in plain sight, masked by wealth, influence, and the illusion of exclusivity. When Will arrived, the first thing he noticed wasn't the luxury. It was the silence. A chilling, almost rehearsed quiet blanketed the estate. The mansion was massive, tucked away in the hills, guarded like a government facility. Uniformed security stood at every entrance, scanning guests not just with their eyes, but with intention. Phones were confiscated immediately. "Standard procedure," someone mumbled. But this felt different. Everyone was being watched. Inside, the atmosphere was surreal. Celebrities, some of the biggest names in the world, mingled with blank expressions, sipping expensive liquor but never truly smiling. It felt like no one wanted to be there, Will recalls. The music was low, the lighting dim, and the conversations hollow. People weren't networking, they were observing, watching, measuring. He locked eyes with a few familiar faces, but their glances didn't bring comfort. Instead, they looked away quickly, as if acknowledging him might be dangerous. "I'd been to elite parties before," Will says, "but this wasn't social. It was strategic, controlled. Something was off, terribly off." And the deeper into the night he went, the more he realized he wasn't just a guest. He was being evaluated. At first, Will tried to play it cool, drink in hand, casual smile, making polite conversation. But the longer he stayed, the more the illusion unraveled. Something kept pulling at his instincts, a quiet alarm in the back of his mind telling him to leave. That's when curiosity got the better of him. He noticed a hallway that most guests seemed to avoid. No music, no laughter, just silence and a subtle red glow leaking from beneath the door. While pretending to look for the restroom, Will slipped away from the main room and followed the corridor. What he found behind that door was something he refuses to describe in full detail, but the words he does use say enough. "I saw things, people, doing things that weren't normal, not for entertainment, not for fun. This was orchestrated, monitored." His voice trembles as he explains that it felt like an audition, or worse, a ritual. There were cameras, people in masks, and participants who didn't look like they had a choice. Some of them, he claims, were barely conscious. Some were being watched from behind mirrored walls. That was the moment everything changed. Will wasn't scared of being judged anymore. He was scared of being next. He backed out slowly, trying not to draw attention, his heart pounding. He didn't just want to leave. He needed to escape. Will's only thought was to get out. But leaving wasn't as simple as turning around. As he retraced his steps back to the main area, he quickly noticed something that made his blood run cold. Every exit was now guarded more heavily than before. The atmosphere had shifted. What earlier felt like an eerie gathering now felt like a trap. He approached one of the guards near a side door and casually asked to step outside for air. The man didn't respond, just stared at him with a fixed expression and blocked his path. Will tried another exit. Same response. No words, no movement, just quiet denial. It felt like they were trained not to talk, he said, not to answer, just to contain. He wasn't alone in this feeling. Another well-known celebrity, someone Will refused to name, whispered to him with a trembling voice, "You don't leave the first time, you just survive it." That sentence haunted him. It confirmed what he feared. This wasn't a party. It was a test. Will started noticing small earpieces on the staff, glances exchanged between people in suits, and doors that led nowhere, or were locked completely. "The room felt like it was closing in on me," he said, "like someone was waiting for me to break." He wasn't being hosted, he was being handled. Will never says Diddy's name outright when describing what he witnessed, but the implications are unmistakable. "The energy of the entire event," he says, "felt like it was designed by someone who wasn't just powerful, but untouchable." And all the whispers, the eye movements, the deferential behavior from the staff, they all pointed in one direction. He recalls seeing Diddy only once that night, but the image stuck with him. Diddy was seated in a private area, surrounded by people who didn't speak unless spoken to. No laughter, no warmth, just silence and control. "He wasn't hosting the party," Will says. "He was observing it." Several guests seemed anxious when he entered the room. Conversations died. Body language shifted. It was as if Diddy's presence changed the entire temperature of the event. According to Will, people acted like they were in a job interview, or worse, a courtroom. What disturbed him most wasn't just Diddy's influence, it was how effortlessly it operated. There were no orders, no commands, yet everything happened around him like clockwork. Everyone knew what role to play. "That's not charisma," Will says. "That's control." The deeper Will reflected on that night, the more he realized it wasn't just about power. It was about surveillance, loyalty, and silence. A system built not on fear alone, but on knowing no one would dare to speak up. After that night, Will says he was never the same. The experience didn't just leave him shaken, it left a scar. For weeks, he couldn't sleep. "I'd wake up in cold sweats thinking I was still in that house," he admits. He became hyper-aware of who was watching him, what he said, where he went. The paranoia wasn't just emotional, it felt engineered. He started pulling back from public appearances, skipping events he would have never missed before. Even close friends noticed the shift. One of them asked if he was okay, and Will's answer was chilling. "I saw something I shouldn't have, and now I can't unsee it." He began to question everything: his colleagues, his mentors, even the projects he was attached to. Who else knew? Who else had been to these so-called parties? How much of Hollywood was built on what people were willing to ignore just to stay relevant? It wasn't fear of losing roles or status that haunted him, it was the guilt. The guilt of staying quiet. The guilt of seeing people he knew and respected trapped in the same system. And the horrifying realization that the entertainment industry wasn't just about talent, it was about obedience. Will calls it psychological warfare. A night that was supposed to be about celebration turned into an initiation into something far more sinister, an elite culture of silence, manipulation, and control. For years, Will kept everything to himself, not because he wanted to, but because he had to. "You don't just walk away from something like that and start talking," he says. "Not when you've seen what happens to the ones who try." Fear wasn't just a feeling, it was a system, a silent agreement that everyone in that room seemed to understand. Speak out, and you vanish. Will reveals that others who attended similar events and dared to question them were met with sudden career roadblocks, projects mysteriously canceled, media smear campaigns, or just a strange silence where opportunities once flowed. "One guy I knew tried to talk," Will says. "Next thing you know, he disappeared from every red carpet, every headline, gone." That fear became his cage. As much as he wanted to warn others, especially younger actors walking blindly into the same traps, he felt paralyzed by the weight of consequence. And with a family to protect, staying quiet became the safest option. But something shifted in him recently. Maybe it was age, maybe it was the growing number of scandals surrounding once powerful names, or maybe it was watching the next generation rise up, unaware of the machine they were stepping into. "I couldn't hold it anymore," he says. "I realized silence only helps the ones who are causing the damage." And so, for the first time, Will speaks. Not to accuse, not to expose for fame, but to warn. Because keeping quiet was never safety. It was complicity. Will's confession isn't just about one night. It's about a pattern, a network of events, behaviors, and people that form the undercurrent of Hollywood's elite circles. That party wasn't an isolated incident, he says. It was one of many. And the worst part? Everyone knows. They just don't speak. He recalls hearing whispers long before he ever attended that night. Stories passed quietly from one actor to another, tales of parties that ended in silence, contracts that came with invisible strings, and careers built not just on talent, but submission. The price of entry isn't always money, Will explains. Sometimes it's what you're willing to ignore. The deeper you go into the industry, he says, the more the glamour fades. You start to realize that some stars rise because they play the game, not because they're the most gifted. Others disappear overnight, blacklisted for asking the wrong questions or for seeing too much. Will also touches on the way younger talents are groomed, invited to private dinners, flown to secluded estates, made to feel special, only to be surrounded by handlers and influencers who manipulate rather than mentor. It's all framed as opportunity, he says, but what it really is recruitment. He emphasizes that Hollywood isn't just a business. It's a system, one that protects those at the top and punishes those who disrupt the silence. And once you see the machinery behind the curtain, you can never look at the industry the same way again. As the conversation draws to a close, Will's tone shifts. Less confessional, more cautionary. He's no longer just telling a story. He's sending a message. Not every invitation is an honor, he says quietly. Sometimes it's a trap dressed as privilege. He doesn't name names, doesn't point fingers, but the weight behind his words is unmistakable. This wasn't a single night of discomfort. It was a revelation of how deeply corrupted the foundation of fame can be. You think you're being welcomed, he says, but what they're really asking is, how much of yourself are you willing to give up to belong? Will urges the next generation of artists, actors, musicians, creators, not to confuse opportunity with obedience, to question everything, especially when the price of success seems too high for the soul. Your talent is not a ticket into darkness, he says. Don't let them convince you it has to be. He doesn't end with anger. He ends with clarity. I stayed quiet because I was afraid, he admits. But now I speak because I don't want others to carry that same weight. And then he leaves us with one final line, a sentence that lingers long after the camera cuts. The real danger in Hollywood isn't losing a role, it's losing yourself.